Boom, video one for all of you folks that have purchased the Chez Ma Niece. What I wanted to do in this video is give us some of the background on how I came to this design personally, not necessarily the historical aspect of it, but me personally, and then we'll get into a lot more cool stuff over the coming weeks. So I think the first video that Jennifer made, Jennifer's my wife, she does all the videography and all the editing and all that stuff. I think the first video she made was a real good indicator of how I came to some of the historical context for this knife design. And I didn't really talk too much about my personal feelings on it and how I came to it personally. So I wanted to do that here so that you know the knife that you're getting has a lot of history from my history in it and tell you why I made it the way that I made it. So there's three primary knives that were the influencers on this particular knife. The first one is this one right here. And this knife right here was hammer forged by one of my best friends. I was the best man in his wedding. He was the best man in my wedding. And it is a small version of a frontiersman long knife, okay? Very classic design here. And what I mean by that, as far as a classic design, is you have this curved handle, which when you're using the tool, puts this in line with your arm. I talked about that in the live video. But the other thing that this provides is some antler handle, and it has a very distinct point, but it's pretty much a straight back. Although it looks as if it's got a huge curve, it doesn't. It's mainly due to the curve of the handle itself. So with that said, these frontiersman's knives were made basically with a high flat grind because that was necessary. You couldn't do all these fancy grinds that we have now. Let me show you knife number two. Knife number two was made by my martial arts instructor, or one of my martial arts instructors, Mr. Mado Moore. He is really good at hand forging blades, and he does that and makes a small little income from doing so. And he made me this knife personally many years ago, and I've used it for a long time. He knows that I love the frontiersman type style knife, and he loves that too. He's got a bunch of camp knives. This is Bright Forge, a bunch of these long knives as well. He put the coffin detail on the handle, which is good for working so you can have that rounded edge on the end of it. But his knife, the one thing that I love about it for this particular knife, but I didn't like for my design, is this is straight from here all the way to here. And so what happens is when you put it in your hand, it basically cants it a little bit so that if you're using as a tool that's digging or thrusting or even in a self-defense situation, it's not going to, it's just not going to be the best physics in the world. So with that said, I love this blade. I will still use this blade even though I'm getting my own Chez Ma Niece, but this needed a little bit more curvature for my design, and I wanted quite a different handle. Again, this is a hand-forged knife that's a recreation history piece, and I love it for that purpose, but I wanted to get something a little bit modern, and I'll show you the next one, and we'll go from there. Now, the third one was hand-forged by quite an artist here in Kentucky, in Central Kentucky. His name's Kenny Lutz, and he does period-correct hand-forged blades that are based upon museum pieces that they know that they have found in old forts, or they found in some family has donated them down through time. And this literally is the most classic design of the three that I have. It has this very distinct point, antler handle. The only thing that's a little different on this one is that it has a rat tang. So basically you had a screw that was hammer forged into the end of the blade, and then you put a nut on it, screw it down, and then you put a butt cap on it. But the thing that these knives, although they are incredibly period correct, and I love them for that, they're very thin right here, and that's a problem for a knife that's going to see considerable use doing some of the woodcraft type things that we might be doing in bushcraft. So they had other tools to do some of those things, like a tomahawk or whatever. So I wanted to get somewhere between blurring the lines between this and some sort of modern tank killer. I like to use that term tank killer because you got some knife that's just a beast. Now, as I told you in the emails, there's two prototypes that are currently out there. One of them is being reviewed by a fairly significant YouTube reviewer. Creek Stewart's doing some things with it as well. And the other one is up with Dwayne Unger and Kevin Estella and Mike Travis, who are all good friends of mine. They're writing articles for magazines for it. And so I don't have one. But here, I thought this would be kind of interesting to you guys. And this is basically the prototype cutout that we made when my wife and I went to LT Wright Knives and we did a video. We'll link to that in the description below too. We did a video on the process of building a knife at LT Wright Knives, and we designed this one while we were there. Before I ever left the building that day, we had sketched this out, drawn this out. This is like 3 or 4 different prototypes that we had drawn out, and then they took it in the back and they just cut it out of some wood. So they basically just took paper that we drew, slapped it on some wood, and then cut it out, and then here's basically the outline of the knife that you are going to be getting. Okay, so here's, again, just for your edification, some of the things I love about this knife. Number one, the handle is sculpted on both ends right here, so that when you're pushing with it and when you're pulling with it, you're going to have a better grip purchase. The blade just has the perfect curvature to be the type that you can have in your hand to do whatever type of cutting, woodcraft, bushcraft tools, as well as if you need to use the point. Scandi grind, we'll go into that later. We're going to talk about grinds. But here's the other things that you may notice about this particular drawing. You'll see this piece right here. So everybody that picked up a prototype of this blade, as soon as they picked it up, everybody said, and when I say everybody, everybody put it in their hand and said, wow, that's light. And I say everybody, I mean everybody. It was exceptionally light, and I designed it and wanted it to be that way. This knife is not designed to be something that you do a lot of chopping with. The people that lived on the frontier from a historical perspective, they did not do that. They used a tomahawk, and they used an axe, or they used a Fort Meigs axe style or something of that nature. They did not use their knife as a chopping tool, because a knife is not supposed to be a chopping tool. And because they are much better than we are at existing in the woods for extended periods of time, I wanted to rely upon that as my inspiration for my design. So I wanted a knife that when you put it on, you could basically forget about it. Yeah, it's long, but the way it's going to be carried, which we're going to go over in another video, is going to negate a lot of that uncomfortability that you might have. So I want to be able to share that with you, and we'll go over that in a future video too. But this is the first video. I wanted to help you out, see some of the things that we sculpted out, some of the metal that's actually on the blade handle. You'll never see that. Now, as far as a couple of things that happened that you might notice here that never made it to the knife, just so you know. First off, one of the things I had etched on was inch marks on the side of the blade. And what I was going to utilize this for, because the first incantation of this knife, when we first started talking about it, the name of it was the Scout Tracker. And I wanted to utilize it for 2 reasons. I wanted to utilize it as the tool that we've been describing all along, as well as I wanted to use it as a tracking tool. And what I meant by that is I wanted to be able to lay the knife down on the ground next to a track and be able to measure tracks with it. 2 reasons. Here's the practical use of it and the marketing use of it. Here's what I wanted to do. Is I wanted to be able to measure those tracks and have that useful. That's the practical side. But the marketing side of it, I thought, is that I could have people taking pictures with a knife and then spreading them on social media so everybody would see this measuring tool and have to have the knife. So I bypassed that because, quite frankly, I love the marketing aspect of that. But at the same time, when I got it in, I just felt it was just a little bit too, I don't know, cheapy. I just didn't like the way it looked. I didn't like the way when you laid your knife down, which I don't like laying a knife down anyway on the ground. So I had them remove that. The other thing that they changed, now you can't tell that on this particular prototype, but when I got the first prototype, it had a fairly thin handle, and several people that held it said, you know, that seems a little thin, like it's biting into my hand a little more, or a little bit too much. So I had them sculpt the handle out so it would fit in somebody's palm quite a bit more comfortably. And I talked to LT and them about that when we were down at Blade Show in Atlanta. And when they gave me the prototype, the second blade, to see how that sculpted handle was going to work, I was like, yeah, that's it. That's why I'm working with LT, because those cats know what they're doing. Perfect handle, perfect blade, perfect carry system, and we got a series of videos coming to you. So we really, really appreciate everybody that's bought the Reliance. When you see it, it's Reliance. That might be worthy of discussion too. I think you saw in the video how I arrived at that name, but one of the things I did is I consulted with some people that have a considerable amount of Shawnee blood in them and said, how do you say this name properly? Because most people say it's Shemanese because it's an E. And the most appropriate term, if you asked a Shawnee how they would say it, they would say Shemanganese, but that gets translated just a little bit more into English than the way it was more commonly used by Europeans. When they describe themselves, like saying, hey, those dudes over there were calling us the Shemanese, they would say the Shemanese. although the Shawnee were probably saying Shamanganese. With that said, that means long knives, 12 inches, and you'll understand when you get it in your hand. Thank you so much. Cannot thank you enough for your purchase of this blade. We're going to do everything we can to over-deliver to you. Come on, join in. Let's learn together.